On behalf of Department of History, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University, I welcome you all to this international conference on socio-political, economic and cultural relations of Deccan with Iran from 14th to 18th century. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University is first open university in this country, and university serves the objective of democratization of higher education and the ideals of continuing education. The Department of History, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University offers courses leading to BA, MA, MPhil, PhD degrees and PG diploma in culture and heritage tourism. Research programs are offered department with the aim of widening the database in its studies of local and regional history, introducing an interdisciplinary approach to understand the underlying social and economic realities of the history. The department organized national seminar on retrieving people's history of Telangana, participation, perception and prosperity in September 2015. And also Department of History organized one-day symposium on spirit of national movement, legacy and relevance in response to the call given by MHRD, Government of India, to celebrate Azadi 70 in remembrance sacrifice of millions of freedom fighters. And Department of History organized many lectures and talks on the relevant topics of history, particularly on regional history. Deccan played a major role in Indian history and was a gateway to the immigrants from Iran and other Western Asian countries. In this conference, four major parts: political and diplomatic relations, economic relations, cultural relations between Deccan and Iran will be discussed.
Deccan History Society is a body of professional archaeologists and historians working in different universities, and this society was aimed and established to promote the history, culture and heritage of the Deccan society, Deccan region. Because though in India, when we call it Deccan or South, it is all part of the India. So, but though it is part of India, but Deccan has its own identity. In the sense, it has its own identity in the field of geography, in the field of polity, in the field of culture, because Deccan has its own identity. That is the reason why I thought this identity or this culture or this history should be highlighted, and more research should be done on this neglected area. Generally, when we speak about the Indian history, we try to get more syllabus or more research on projecting on Deccan, like Mughals or Delhi Sultanate or some other dynasties or some other rulers. But though equally the Deccan or South India also ruled important dynasties, and they have contributed a lot in the field of society and economy, but it is not that much projected. So that is the reason why we thought that the society should do more research and promote research and academic activity on the various aspects of the Deccan. So starting from early period, Shatavahanas, to the Asaf Jahi period. So in between, particularly during the medieval period, the dynasties or the rulers who ruled this Deccan area, like the Vijayanagara rulers or the Bahmanis or the Qutub Shahis or the Adil Shahis or the Berar, these are also very important dynasties which ruled this Deccan, and their contribution is much more, or rather equal to the contribution made by the Mughal rulers or Delhi Sultanate rulers or other North Indian rulers. So that is one of the important aim and objective of this society to promote this. This is the aim and objective of this society. Coming to the main theme which we have selected for today's conference is the socio-economic and political and cultural aspects of the Deccan. Because Bahmanis and the Vijayanagaras, the Qutub Shahis, these rulers, they ruled from 14th century to almost 17th century. And this, during this period, the important point is, in the northern India you can find the migrations are taken place during the medieval period more from the northwestern side also, but people belonging to the race of the Turkish race, they came and they established their own authority in the India, or particularly in the northern India. But in south, during the medieval period, more migration also taken place, but it is not they are not particularly belonging to the Turkish race, but they belongs to the Iranian race. So there is a difference of the this thing you can find in the migration of the people who came and settled in northern India, and the people who came and migrated during the medieval period in South India. That is the difference. North you can find the Turkish, and then in south more are the Persian. So that is the reason why the Deccan rulers, most of the kingdoms or the rulers, they belongs to the Persian race. They came from Persia. Take the example of even the Bahmani founder, Bahman Shah Gangu, or the Adil Shahi founders, or the Qutub Shahi founders. They came from Iran. So that is the reason why you will have a different culture, different identity when you find between northern India and the South India, and more particularly in the Deccan. South is excluding Kerala, the whole south is under Deccan only. So that way, so these rulers during their regime, they have not only encouraged the local traditions, local customs, local language, but they have also established a tradition, a new tradition, which is Indo-Persian. So the ruler, for example, the founder of the Qutub Shahi dynasty, Sultan Quli Qutbul Mulk, he came from Iran, that is Hamadan. He is from Hamadan. He came and first joined in the Bahmani kingdom, and later on, after the downfall of the Bahmanis, he established his own kingdom. Yes, his own kingdom, his mother tongue, and he is from Iran. But once he established his kingdom, he never neglected the local traditions, local language, local customs, etc. Not only during his period, even his successors, whoever they have ruled after the founder of the Qutub Shahi dynasty, they have followed strictly the tradition which was continued, rather started during the Sultan Quli period, the founder. So that way, the Deccan rulers, though there are Maratha region, they never neglected their local language and local tradition. That is the greatness. These are the certain things which has to be highlighted, which has to be promoted by doing some research. So this is the reason why this conference was organized for 2 days here in this university. Nearly 60 papers we have received.
History is a continuous dialogue between present and past. Past not make dialogue with us. We make dialogue with the past. Those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. These are the two things inspired me a lot to develop some keen interest in the history and historical studies and other matters related to history. You know, what best we can learn from the history is the important question. We have a lot of past experience. Sometimes history is also a burden on the human thinking and human brains. But the question here is what we can learn from the history. How best we cannot repeat mistakes which were done in the history. That is the fundamental aim of mankind or human civilization, to learn from the civilization, history and other aspects. In 1992, Professor Samuel P. Huntington made a proposal in response to his old student, former student, Robert Fukuyama, who wrote a book on the end of history and last man of civilization. To counter that, he made a proposal saying that clash of civilizations. In future, if wars takes place in the world, they will be fought in the name of culture, cultural identity and religious identities. And recently one book by Yuval Noah Harari, I bought it very recently. He wrote 3 books, very popular historian of Israel, and he was expert in medieval military history from Oxford. And he wrote on past, future and present. Past, that book is Sapiens, about future Homo Deus, and about present, 21 lessons for the 21st century. And he wrote 21 articles in this book. In the third part of the book, he mainly dealt with the despair and hope. That was the section's title. One is about terrorism. Don't be panic about terrorism. Subtitle. War. Never underestimate human stupidity. God. Don't take the name of God in vain. Secularism. Acknowledge your shadow. These are the titles of essays and subtitles in the part 3 of this book. This is very interesting book I found.
It's a great time to understand about history, how it shapes the human life. So if you see the other perspective, if you see once in a while, people say past makes the present and present makes the future. But in many cases, if you see in a different perspective, the future has sown the seed of the present, and also they prepared for that seed to be flourished in the name of past. So the future has dictated, because we are not seeing it, so we call it as future. But in a 360-degree view perspective, if you see, future is here, present is here, past is here. Like as we see the world, earlier the people used to think earth is like flat. But when they discovered it as a globe, now going to America, for example, people thought it is always through Middle East, Europe and then to America. But now they're thinking you can also go through, say, Thailand and Japan to US. Because if it is not flat, then this is the easiest direction to go. Because same way, there is nothing called past, present, future. The future creates the conditions which are existing today from the other side. So it's all intermixed, interrelated. Everything is interconnected. So that's how, if you see many of the issues which are bothering us in the world today, most of us are facing the difficulties created by our own solutions, which we thought are the best solution for the problems. So every problem comes out of a solution for a problem. One day's solution of a problem is today's the problem. For example, at the time of India's partition, people thought it's so easy to get out of this problem of Hindu-Muslim divide or some demands for a separate country of Pakistan. So they thought it is the issue. So that was the easiest solution that time they found. But today, because of the two countries, because of different ideologies, because of various socio-economic, political interests the people have in this part of the country and that part of that country, now we are finding so many problems. Otherwise, if it was one country, it would have been easy to deal with the people who are doing all this mischief. But since they are in a different country, you can't do anything. So you'll have to have all the problems faced. Same way, most of the problems today we are facing in the world, in the name of terrorism and all, is all because of the wrong way of handling of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is such a great, important geographical unity, geographical place in the world. Anything which you do mischief there, it will have permanent impact on the world. So the imperialistic forces of Russia and Britain, they were trying to control Afghanistan. Because of that misfired calculations in the past and in the near past, the miscalculated interventions of America, today we are seeing all the problems in the world. Otherwise, there's not much of a problem. If you have left Afghanistan to fend for themselves, because the tribes there, they want freedom. They don't want to be controlled by anybody. Just because you are an imperialistic force, you want to go and control them, then it will backfire. So that's what we are seeing. Coming to the present topic today, Persian influence. Why I am calling it as Persian is Iran is Persia. So instead of calling it as Iran, you could have called it as Persian. It would have been easy. So Persian influence in Deccan is unmistakable, and it can never be removed from the history. It's impossible, because Hyderabad is because of Persian influence. All of us are sitting here because of Persian influence. If there is no relationship with Persia, probably Hyderabad would not have been born at all. That's what my understanding of history, as much as I know, because Persian influence created a socio-economic political environment which wanted a separate way of ruling, separate way of lifestyle, separate way of living. Everything created a new place. Otherwise, Warangal would have been the capital. It would have continued for some more time also. So a new king comes, he wanted a new way of life. That is how the life goes on. The necessity creates the invention. So same way, Vijayanagara kingdom was a big thing. Today Bangalore has come. Where is Vijayanagara? Today Hampi is ruins only. We can't find anything there. So like that, the Persian influence created big cities, big cultural understandings, new architectural systems came, new writing systems came, new living systems came, new food habits came, new dressing habits came. Everything got changed. Rightly so, it should happen all the time without conflict. If we can adjust to the changes, it is the best. But sometimes conflict is unavoidable. Because as I said, in Afghanistan, they never went and attacked anybody. But two imperialistic forces wanted to control it. See, Britain was already controlling India. It is jewel crown in their kingdoms. So they are very much interested to control India. So they thought, if Russia controls Afghanistan, then slowly they will come to India, and then their crown jewel will be lost. So Britain wanted to control Afghanistan. Then the fighting. Now today we are seeing this. So why India was so rich? Why these people wanted to control all these things? Again, there's lots of histories. Otherwise, why India is so great? Why they wanted to come to India? Every country wanted to come to India. So now all the Indians want to go out of India. You see the difference. Suddenly, if you see here, almost every one of us, 99% of the people who are sitting in this auditorium, for example, will have somebody in US. Somebody. There is no family worth a level of development which is anybody in which is nobody in US. It's not possible. Why? What happened to this country? So if you see, all this can be understood as if you say Professor Sitaram or esteemed Vice Chancellor was mentioning, it is a constant dialogue between past and present and also future. What we do today will dictate the future. If you see this perspective, our future is already created, so the future what we are talking may be the past of the past. Past of the past. Only we are only seeing it after some time. Just because you are seeing after some time, it can't be past. It may be the past of the past. So the past has created the old past has created immediate past, and immediate past we are living today as present. So that's how things keep churning out. It's a 360-degree view. So the socio-economic conditions, the whole lifestyle has changed because of Persian influence from 14th century to 18th century. The theme of this theme of this conference is very, very important. If we can understand why these things have happened and what to learn from it and how not to make same mistakes. So it's like, suppose we are as kids, we must have burnt our hand when we are trying to touch something hot. So again our child need not learn it, because when he's going close to that anything hot, we will immediately say, don't go there, you will get hurt. So that's how maybe some children will listen, some children will not listen, but they will learn it hard way. If those people who do not learn, they will learn it hard way. थोड़ा सा जल जाता है, then उसको समझ में आ जाता है. Suppose if you learn, then that time is that healing time, that pain is not there, that child could use it for something else in a better manner. So same way, some people, those who cannot understand human psyche, they think history is a waste. Why to study history? Some people think like that. Why they think like that? Again, there's an issue if you understand from their perspective is because the way history is taught is like that. History, you have to only understand, you have to only remember things. When this battle happened, when that battle happened, who ruled what is his name, what is her name, what is the capital, how it used to happen, everything like just remembering, nothing to understand. Even our question papers, because I had Indian history in my prelims, I had a history for civil services for some time. So the way history is taught and examined is also maybe a fault. See, because you are all professors belonging to that subject, and you are all the people who will be maybe setting papers for various exams, and also you are the evaluators of various exam papers. So the way history is taught, practiced and also tested is the reason for this. But if you see the ICIC books, for example, our state history books, state syllabus books, you see our CBSE books, if you see ICIC books, same history subject. Between a period, if you see, they are totally different. The perspective of history, for example, how the women were treated from say from ancient period to modern period. It can be a good chapter. Nowhere you will find such chapter. How our eating habits have changed during say Mughal period. No chapter will be there. Who was Birbal, who was Babur, who was Akbar, then who was Shah Jahan, then like that only it goes on in the same way, and you will just remember them, that's all. So some people who are interested to do some understanding, they think this is a useless thing. Why should you learn? Just publish a book and keep it there. You can just use it. Now everything is there. Google Mata, just Google it and it will give you. So where is the understanding? But Google can never give how the perspective of life changed from a untouchable perspective, how it came, how this untouchability issue came, how the child labor issue came, how slavery came, how the global warming systems have started, how our dressing habits changed. Do you have a chapter or a book on this? Never. So the way, see, what is important to the people is how they are being impacted by the past. So that kind of books to be written, that kind of way of teaching is required, that kind of testing is also required. Then I think people will understand history as the most important subject. There is no doubt about it. Because suppose I was seeing a good documentary on maybe how much of it is true, that is a different story. I believe it is 99% true. But I am telling you, see that video of how Afghanistan was a great impact on the present day issues world is facing with. So that kind of telling of a history is more important, and anybody who is in IIT or in AIMS or in fundamental research also will definitely read this way of telling history than just chronological, personality based type of history. It's okay, Akbar is a great king, Ashoka was also a great king, we are not disputing it. But we are not here to only praise them. Now if you see, history writing is like creating heroes among the rulers. That's all, nothing more. If you read the old history books as I read, it's nothing tells about our life. It's just trying to project a person or create a villain out of a person. Some people are created as villains, some people are created as heroes and heroines. That's all.
Political history was given more.
Whatever. Political history also can be told in a different way. So, political history is also not creating heroes and heroines or this thing. That is also a wrong way of political history. So, the way it was told is the problem. That's what. So, at least in this kind of important seminars, let us try to understand how that period impacted our lifestyle and as we live today, both positive and negative, how it is coming out of that. So that kind of papers are required. But if the professors, the practitioners, if they don't teach that way, then the papers, people who are writing also will not present such papers. Because at the end of the day, people who are writing papers are looking for your patronage. Seniors who are all, so this paper, if it is not going to be valued much by my professor, I will not write. Because I am not in such level to have conflict or to understand, to have that kind of understanding to turn the tables. They are not at that level at this stage. So, Deccan area, as we understand, is very, very important area. It's a cradle of history, cradle of human life, human civilization, because Deccan area, especially part of the Deccan which we are living, Telangana, is very, very important geographical unit in the world. which has created number of things, and also the other parts of Deccan. Because the history of this area is not written that much when compared to the North Indian side. So the historian is also a culprit in not projecting things in a proper perspective also. For example, we have many things, if you see in the world, which we have, which are not projected, then what will think finally, only that is the way we have to learn. For example, the great grandfather or the grandfather or father has all the knowledge about a particular subject. Suppose that subject are not written at all, and they have died, for example. Now only the small kids are there in their family. What will happen? They will start reading from ABC only. Anyway, they have to learn through ABCD only. But after that, they will have to go through the books of present day than the books they already have in their houses, because they are not written. The knowledge base was there, but since it was not written, you are going through the small levels again to reach to that level. Suppose now I have to start some research on, say, a car. Suppose all the knowledge of car manufacturing is lost, then we'll start inventing the wheel again. That is what we have to do. So, like that, the Deccan history, the way it is written, is very minimal. Whereas the Mughal and the Magadh or Gupta, Mauryan history, the way it is written is far more when compared to that. Probably, maybe the historians from South India were not that prominent in the whole historical writing. Maybe it is D.D. Kausambi or somebody else. So the more of that area they started writing, so less and less of this area is not written. But at least now onwards, when we are writing all these things, let us write in a way which is of interest to everybody. I don't want to learn who was my king, say 20 years or 100 years or 1000 years back. But that interest should come because of the great work they have created, not knowing about him and then knowing about what he has done. First I should have interest of what he has done, then who is that? That is the best way to understand. After seeing a movie is so good, then I should think, who is this director who has created this masterpiece? That is how then it gets impacted in your mind, imprinted into your mind more when compared to going to a director's movie all the time. You go only to the director's movie, that means you are missing lots of greater opportunities. Right? So, these kind of seminars are very critical. That's why we try to encourage this, being a student of history myself to some extent, and also to understand the human civilization in a various perspectives. I think it is important to give this perspective to all the historians here, so that we understand our life as we show to our children. For example, when they are growing up, we'll show you, as a kid you are like this. We show them the photographs, no? So when you are in college you are like this, now you are like this. So that is how we show. Equally important is how they learned few things. That is chronological perspective. So chronological perspective is required in life systems, not only the physical systems. As I said, say how printing has started. For example, as a subject I am saying, the history of printing. So in the process, Akbar may come, Jahangir may come, or Ashoka may come, or some Sun Yat-sen may come, whoever it is. I am just trying to put names may come in the process. History of singing, for example, in the process, these kings popularized singing, these people gave support to singing, may come. So if that kind of this thing comes, I think everybody from the hardcore science practitioners to philosophers to politicians to everybody would like to come back to the history departments to research, to understand. Because who are the richest people in the world? The historians only, not others. You have all the repository, whether it is science research, whether it is academic research, whether it is astronomical research, whether it is geological research. It is with you only. They may call it as geology subject, but you are the custodians of all the till this minute it is with you. Next minute it is history. If I go to next minute to say when I came into this room, when I started speaking, has become already history. So that way historians are the richest people. So you are not understanding that wealth of your position. Tell in a way very, very important to them so that they become your practitioners, they become your patrons, they become your subjects, they become your disciples in all the way. So that is how the history should be continued. So thank you very much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share this.
For inviting me to the seminar, which is indeed an occasion not only to refresh my memory, as has been mentioned here, on the Deccan, but also the interaction, and that is what I feel more important, on the numerous factors contributing to the richness of our cultural heritage. It is not a cliche to acknowledge the unique role of the Deccan in Indian history. In this context, the importance of history and research in the quest for cultural identities, I'm repeating, cultural identities, is of particular significance. At a juncture in humanities history and socio-political experience where traditional values are forgotten and contested, replaced, as we all know now, if you just have to read the media in whatever form, by polarized and controversial issues, and what has now become established, let's say, idiom, which is alternative facts. So historians are trying to deal with alternative facts, trying to find out what they are, and which have been defined by people who are nothing, or let's say, who are not historians. In this confused atmosphere and environment, there's a universal phenomenon which is taking place in different shapes and regional and local levels. UNESCO, as the lead international agency designated to try and understand these phenomena and the impact on our daily lives, came out, as it usually does every decade, on its report, Reshaping Cultural Policies, Advancing Creativity for Development. They're putting emphasis on creativity in whatever shape. The report concludes that cultural value chain is rapidly being transformed from a pipeline-like configuration to a network model I say, and few countries have strategies in place to understand or deal with these changes. We are all at a loss trying to understand what is going on. Further, a new type of relationship between the public and private sector and civil society is taking place and is very interactive. Collaboration and construction of policy frameworks has not yet emerged. So all these different factors are taking place in what you call research and trying to understand what is going on. But we do not know really how we can get our act together. This is why this seminar is of high significance, particularly. It is really about the messenger and the message. Very often the Vice Chancellor one confuses the Vice Chancellor in his role either as the messenger or the message. He's so enthusiastic about carrying on the message that his message has overtaken his role as the messenger. Now, it is no coincidence that you have such a distinguished person here, because he's in the right place at the right time. I do not know if many of you knew Professor Ram Reddy, who was equally enthusiastic but in another environment. This Vice Chancellor finds himself in a situation where this university has been acknowledged as an international institution by IGNOU and especially by the Open University in England. And its works and its achievements are highly recognized and praised everywhere. In this reputation, the university's credit goes to the fact that it is exploring new venues and new paths to learning, and new means are being capitalized. Building the dynamic set in place by Professor Ram Reddy is to the credit of Professor Sitaram Rao in promoting interdisciplinary research. As you know, most of us researchers, most of the professors, most of the disciplines live in silos, and they look either up or down to further the research. Very little is being done, really, compared to the problem on interdisciplinary research and the challenges facing it. Both academia and political leadership have a long way in trying to understand and grasp how to get the thing together in a bird's eye view of the phenomenon, rather than just trying to see it in a fragmented or a specialized. There are a lot of specialists today, but there are very few generalist doctors. You can tell you about your heartache, about your lungs, about your cancer, whatever it is, but very few generalists who can look at your pulse, like in the Ayurvedic or Unani tradition, and say, maybe that is the problem with you. Surrounded by historians, I do not need to preach about the importance of history, because I'm convinced of it. But I will try and quote Romila Thapar, because she has summarized this better than I could ever do in her book, The Past as Present. Everyone here has spoken of the past and the present, and she's saying understanding our past is of vital importance to our present. So this is, I'm just repeating this. Now, zooming into the seminar, and it's what we can expect from it. And in this particular, as our previous speaker said, Irani or Persian. I would say more the Persian influence, because Irani is much more geographical. On our own history, it is interlinked, and it cannot be separated, starting from the Achaemenid Empire of Iran, which covered the northeast of the Indus Valley. This regional proximity and interconnectivity have created a very complex and a triangular relationship. It's a marriage between three and not between two. Fortunately, unfortunately. I don't know who are the two wives or the two husbands. It is between the Iranian Empire, Delhi, and the Deccan. This relationship has, for the last 1,000 years, troubled us, loved us, embraced us, divorced us, anyway, changed our lives. A plethora of political and socio-cultural economic legacies and multifaceted documents are available to discover this. These relations could be examined through a prism of regional transformations of the Deccan. Since some of you, I think, are mathematicians and so on, so I could just give you a puzzle, where originally in our era you had three big kingdoms, then Tughlaq made an introduction, and it became one kingdom. Then this was inherited by another Bahmanian kingdom, which again became 5 kingdoms. Then Delhi again intervenes, and it becomes one kingdom, or a governorate, kingdom of the Delhi. Then breaks away and becomes a kingdom come a governorate. And then fighting after the post-colonial era, continuing with that legacy of joint and centripetal and centrifugal terminology. Then it becomes one linguistic state to become again 2 states. So where are we going? In Latin we say quo vadis, I do not know, because maybe we are not looking at the right way or the right solutions like our previous predecessors said. This is why your work, Vice Chancellor, is so important in trying to help us understand, because you are extending the net wide with the capacities of this institution, which very few universities have. You have a flexibility, like you rightly said, and you have absolutely capitalized on that, including the interdisciplinary approach, which is much more difficult to, I wouldn't say you can sandwich it, because you're still rediscovering it and exploring it, and that's where your strength lies. What is specific about the Deccan and its diversity and shifting political frontiers, and where we know where the heart is, our beloved Telangana, without being nationalistic or regionalistic. Max Weber has perhaps better understood this. He calls it a community of memories, because we are talking of frontiers and all that physical. He calls it a community of memories often has deeper impact than the ties of merely cultural, linguistic, or ethnic community, as is the ultimate decisive element of the national consciousness. So perhaps what we share with that is more important than what we believe in or what we talk about. A common memory between two persons is much more important than what their origins are very often. There's a mass of documentation which is available for us to understand, which unfortunately has been buried. Just to name a few of the Asif Jai period things, you've got Kafi Khan, Shahnawaz Khan's biography, Nizamul Mulk, Munim Khan's Sawane Dakkan, Yusuf Muhammad Khan's Tarikh-e-Fatiyah, Mansur Ram's Masir-e Nizami, Darbar-e Asafi, Ilayat Future-e Asafi, Muhammad Amin Majma's Insha, Ram Singh's Gulshan-e Ajaib, and Wali Muhammad's Gulshan. These are just some of the few I mentioned, which are quite well known. But what is really the treasure chest is the rich Telugu literature and poets who thrived at that time, and as we just got a little mention about their remarkable works. And for those of you who are not aware of this, or since many of you are perhaps, but those who aren't, there's a very interesting research work which was done by Srimati Vasumati in a thesis on Telugu literature in the Qutub Shahi period. And you'll make some allusion to it in the seminar. I'm very, very glad, because this really needs to be encouraged. And it is very much part of our psyche at the moment, and which people don't have access to. This seminar is very, not only ambitious, but it's surprising. When I got your program day before yesterday, you pass from that trilogy to the 5 phases, and you change the title. Very good, I'm glad, because we are not a political organization or can be used for political purposes and our capacity researchers. Then only last night or yesterday afternoon, I said, please ask the honorable presenter to give a written presentation, because very often in seminars you hear and you forget. But once, when I was in Liberia in one of my missions, one of the ministers who was just a sergeant, because it was a period when sergeants were taking over countries, he was there with his whiskey bottle, but he said it was coffee, dark glasses, so I couldn't see the redness of his eyes, and he said, well, you are an expert, aren't you? I said, I tried to be, I'm not an expert, but I learned. He said, why aren't you taking notes when I'm talking? I'm a minister. So I said, well, sir, because I can't listen and write at the same time. He said, come to the window. And he took me to the window, and he said, you see on the beach there, that woman, no shoes, poor woman, fisher woman? Well, she's my mother. And she told me, look, I do not know how to read or write, but you are going to read and write, and you're going to be better than me. To be better than me, you have to write and keep it a thing. So he said, my mother told me a short pencil is better than a long memory. So please, I beg of all of you who are going to present your papers here to write them and give it, because speeches are forgotten. Thank you very much. And as I was saying, sorry, before this diversion, red herring, he told me yesterday afternoon, maybe 30, 35 papers. Now I see it's 60. Well, I wish you really encourage, because it's a challenging task in these 2 days to give honorable respect to the work of the 60 researchers. So if you cannot summarize what you have done, but at least give your paper, so that after you will leave your traces on which the other researchers can go forward. Now, having said all this, let me end with Mark Twain, who says, history does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Now, as you know, our Telangana region, every function is with either dance or a song. In the last seminar you had, a lady with a beautiful voice sang and took up the 3/4 of the time of the others, but no one could stop her or would stop her because of the beauty of the rhythm and the music. So let me end now with a poem, because most of us basically at heart are poets. And this is a poem by Mir Mozam Hussain, who was a son of the soil, devoted his life to this place. And he was inspired by the work of Prince Dara Shikoh with his mysticism. We talk of mysticism, interreligious, Nazm-e Baharain, interreligious confluence of the different religions of this great prince. And he says, and this is for you researchers, all of you, though inarticulate, the living urge, the lure to climb to higher things exists, reposing deep down in the hearts of men, albeit often crushed like flowers underfoot. It spurs all noble minds to high attempt. It drives mankind by the love of the unknown, which you all researchers do, his slumbering soul awakened from its deep sleep, to glimpse even a moment the divine, like the lion-hearted mountaineer who, struggling upwards to the mountain's crest, sees on a sudden, through the parted clouds, the sunlit summits beckoning to him to strive again. So please continue striving. And I wish the very best to the seminar and look forward to your follow-up. Thank you very much.
Any seminar, any conference is a wonderful opportunity for academic persons coming from the very, very exciting field, which gives you a lot of opportunities about learning things, unlearning things, and probably if there is a need, you've got to learn. And that's how you create history. If you don't unlearn what you have been doing for ages, if you don't learn what is required, and if you don't relearn what is essential for re-establishing your own identity, I think you're not trying to do anything other than what animals out of compulsion do. So to distinguish yourself from the other species, probably you've got to do something differently. We end up doing the same things, but whoever does it differently would really carve out a niche for himself, and that's a researcher. And research is a very exciting journey which takes you from the unknown to the known. That's a very, very rewarding journey, in fact. Whoever is successful in trying to pick up the gaps and filling those gaps only will definitely create a history in the academic circles. The others would remain to be. I also ran the race category. And I have lots of people here who have come up with 60 papers. And I don't know much about the socio-political, economic, and cultural relations of Deccani with Iran. Somebody has characterized it to be Persia, or Persian kind of this thing. I don't even know much about 14th to 18th century, what happened. I only know about a bit that really allows me to live on to about 21st century and nothing else. That's my identity. And these seminars and these things, as far as research output is concerned, should actually point up something which has not been picked up by anybody. It is, somebody is making a mention, I would sum it up for you all. It is a question of human mind's stupidity versus individual serendipity. That's a very important thing. Individual stupidity versus human stupidity versus individual serendipity. If the second is true, all others would definitely belong to the first category. If the first is true, all of us would remain mediocres. We have to make a choice. And then research, when you really seriously give it an intellectual thought, we get into a mode of research only to help formulation of policy which is going to really concern a lot of segments of the society, and unquestionably so, admittedly so. But the point here is, if you are making efforts which are going to really form a part of policy formulation, policy prescription, there is a question, I'll tell you what it is. If you are trying to base all your research efforts only to prove or disprove a policy, there's another question. So, is it something which is going to lead us from a way which is policy-driven research versus research-driven policy? This is a very, very important thing. You have to make a choice between these two, whether you would like to make a mark of your own by being a part of the policy or being a part of implementation of the networks. This is very, very important. Now, as all of us would put definitely all the heads together in order to find a solution to all these problems, and then history, being history, it is a perfect, rather, way of connecting the past with the present, providing all the leads to the future. This is how I try to stitch a relationship between past, future, and the present. Past, in a very loose sense, past is a memory, present is a reality, future is a hope. I hope this seminar will definitely connect all the loose ends in the history to definitely create history. Thank you so much.
Organizer of the today's seminar, Professor Sudharani, and her colleagues Vadyanam Srinivas and Dayakar, and guest of honor, Ms. Razgar Ali Hussain Saab, and Sri Burra Venkatesham Sir IAS, the chief guest of today's function, and today's keynote speaker, Professor V. Kishan Rao Sir, and Professor Sudhakar, Professor Academic, Director Academic, and my dear colleague, all the colleagues, dignitaries, and the participants of the seminars. So I feel very happy for permitting our Vice Chancellor for organizing this seminar. And last year we have organized a series of seminars, and this is going to be the first seminar in this current year on behalf of the Faculty of Social Sciences. I thank Professor Sudharani and Professor Syed Ayub Ali Saab for jointly organizing this seminar. It is going to be a historic event for future research in the area of Deccan and Deccan history, more specifically, and keeping in view the important aspects given to us by Professor dear Sri Burra Venkatesham Saab. So what you have missed in studying history and doing research and writing a different altogether different history or creating different history altogether, taking into account all the aspects what we have forgot. What he said, I can briefly tell that any book if you read, it is a narration of all the kings and the rulers of the Deccan or India or the country. But the people, basically maybe it could be the Dalits, women, or the peasants, those who made important contribution for the history, their role is missed in the history. But the historians, the researchers of the Faculty of History, I request to keep these things in view so that you can also pay attention in their future research and making their contribution to the history. And sir, Professor, the chief guest of today's function, Dr. Asghar Hussain Saab, has made a very interesting comment on the relationship between the north, the south, and the Persian. There is a kind of triangle contest. If we go further, you can also add a quadrangle context where the people who are influenced. If we see, there was a Deccan and Persian Deccan and the north, Delhi. What made the Delhi Sultanates to come to Deccan, and what made the Persians to come to Deccan, and what were the situation prior to the Deccan intervention of these Deccan Sultanates? The Deccan was, I think, ruled by seven principal states, seven principal kingdoms, altogether independent and fighting each other. And ultimately, all the Deccan rulers, basically 5 states, formed into a confederation where they fought against the Vijayanagara kingdoms, and that is one story. And ultimately, what made the Deccan or the Delhi to intervene in the affairs of the Deccan? The kind of integration the Babur wanted to, the joint the Deccan and the north. That is one thing. So he wanted to have a cultural integrity between the Deccan and the north. That is one thing. And in the fight between this Delhi and the Deccan, there may be kind of again consolidation and reconsolidation, and again the invasion of the Mughals, and again infights between among the Deccan people. Because of these different fights between and among these Deccan and the intervention of the Mughals, this affected a lot in the cultural history of the Deccan. So the reason why it could be the food habits or the architecture or the food habits, living styles. So, and after the coming of the British, it added another dimension, making a lot of changes. So this way, if we take into account the history of our past, maybe there are many innovations may take place in the future also, and ultimately we may be going to live under the influence of so many regions and religions and rulers. Ultimately the lifestyles may also further change. And I thank the head department of history, Dayakar and Sudharani and Vadyanam Srinivas, in collaboration of the Deccan History Society, for organizing this interesting event, where this is going to be another occasion in this year, taking lead from this conference. I think other colleagues may organize some more seminars in this year, because this is all happening because of the interest, and our Vice Chancellor has taken a lot of interest in organizing this kind of seminars. During his tenure, we have seen so many kind of seminars and workshops, and this is the beginning of such kind of seminar during his Vice Chancellorship, and a few more such seminars may take place in the future days to come. And I thank our Vice Chancellor for giving an opportunity for the Faculty of Social Sciences for organizing this seminar on behalf of the History Department of History. And before that, I thank Professor Kishan Rao sir for coming over here for want to give the keynote address here, because Kishan Rao was a great help to me basically for during his tenure as registrar of the university. I used to take his advice on various aspects of the administration, because he is the senior-most person, and also he has a rich experience in the administrative aspects of the university administration. So I thank you, sir, on behalf of the University Department of the History, for coming over here. And he really is a great personality. He used to give me a lot of advice in managing the university administration. And with these few remarks of mine, I don't have much knowledge about the Deccan, but a little bit I could talk, because yesterday itself I've gone through the website and taken the clue, but that gave me a lot of inputs. So lot of inputs, because really we must read history, because this gives us how we were governed under different rulers. What made us to, go for a different styles of life, food habits, arts, architecture, poetry. If you see anything, there is an intermix of various the influence of various rulers. So I definitely wanted to inform all these history people here present that that gave me a lot of impetus, where I am going to read history from now onwards. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be again with our distinguished chief guest, Shri Burra Venkateshan Garu. I had the good fortune of associating myself with him on 3 occasions. Thereby I could understand what kind of personality he is. He is not here, but I pay my respects to him in his absence. I am equally concerned with the presence of our Dr. Mir Asghar Hussain Sahab, Director UNESCO, Advisor International Euro-Arab Dialogue, to whom I have met for the second time earlier during a international seminar which was conducted in the Iran Consulate General of Hyderabad on the Muharram ceremonies among the non-Muslims of Andhra Pradesh. With the collaboration of Consulate, Iran Consulate. I am happy that he is one among the midst of all of you. And of course my colleague, Professor A. Sudhakar, I have heard him just now. I know about Professor Sudhakar, but the only thing is we never met, and this is the first occasion I am meeting him. I am told that he is from management side, and aptly as a management person, what is that you have to convey to the audience, you have done it, you did it. And thank you for the wonderful message you have given. And of course my dear friend, colleague, a distinguished personality, unassuming personality, is none other than our registrar, Professor C. Venkateshan Garu. He talked many great things about me, but nothing like we work together in the ordinary way what we are supposed to discharge our responsibilities as the head of the administration. So thank you very much for your wonderful compliments, Professor Venkateshan Garu. Of course, I have to personally thank my friend, a colleague of mine in Kakatiya University. He always take the liberty of calling anyone, everyone, anytime, and simply invites us, saying you are coming, that's all. There is no question of a special invitation to be extended. Such a wonderful relation we have. I am really happy to be with Ayub Ali since a long time, and even from the time of his marriage till today, we have maintained the same relations. That is what everybody needs when you are in close contact with your own colleagues. That should never be, missing between the relation of a colleague. And I thank you, Professor Ayub.
दूल्हा बन के आपके गाड़ी में गया
वो नहीं बोला मैं, because अच्छा नहीं दिखता है. Even I had the opportunity of driving my car and take him to the venue of the marriage. It was a pleasure for me at that time. And of course my sister, Professor Sudha Rani, co-director, Department of History, Dr. Ambedkar Open University, and director in the present set. Of course, I have no words to express about Professor Sudha, but I always call Sudha, but as a customary, I am expressing my happiness about Sudha's functioning here in the Department of History, as well elsewhere and all over, and she is known for his commitment, dedication to the faculty, to the Department of History, and to all of us. So I know her since a long time, and my appreciation to Professor Sudha for conducting such a wonderful program here in this Department of History, along with his colleagues. We have our colleagues here, Srinivas, Dr. Srinivas, and Dr. Dayakar, head of the department. And I thank all of you for giving me an opportunity to be a part of it. And all the distinguished personalities who are assembled here, and a person, Professor Aziz Hussain Saab, who is here to deliver endowment lecture. And I say my namaskars to you, sir, and all the distinguished personalities, historians, research scholars, students, friends, media, and all those who are present here at the invitation of our personalities here for this occasion, and media friends. So one thing, I request the Vice Chancellor and the President of the today's program, sir, please allow me to read out the text what I have brought, because as a customary, I have to do my duty here. As you have all heard, everyone speaking today since morning till afternoon, you have noted almost every aspect of it. What is that I am supposed to give a keynote address. So the keynote address is already given by everyone. Normally I expected that the keynote address will be in the beginning, so that the participants will have a broader perspective of what is that a keynote address should be. But I'm happy that I could listen to each one of my own colleagues who are here on the dais and off the dais, that they have wonderfully presented the entire subject of the socio-political, economic and cultural relations of Deccan with Iran from 14th to 18th century. Each one is an expert with a varied experience of teaching, research, and their own personal experiences all over. You can see what kind of presentation they have done. We could have given each one of them at least half an hour, so that the whole subject could have been in toto and concised in a volume like. So as a customary, I'm just trying to share what minimum knowledge I have about, and what my brother Professor Ayub Ali dictated, directed, ordered me to be here to present the keynote address. So based on his dictatorship, I am trying to give a little bit of my knowledge towards this, and if there are any lapses or fallacies or anything, please pardon me. Dear friends, it is my privilege and pleasure to deliver the keynote address in this conference. India and Iran have been maintaining close relations and cultural values since a long time. The archaeological excavation indicate about the prevalence of trade in Iran since 1500 BC. Due to the geographical proximity of India and Iran, from the 8th century onward, immigrants from Iran came to India as peaceful traders with their merchandise, ideas, and as conquerors. They migrated to Deccan Straits soon after. Some Iranians were tourists to India, others decided to stay back and settle down. Consequently, their offspring were born and brought up in India. Iranians traveled to India in groups or as individuals. Specific factors motivated the members of a family to abandon their attachments in Iran and migrate to India. In both cases, the reason responsible for travel or migration could be classified and reviewed. During the 13th and 14th century, a major factor behind the migration of Iranians to India was due to the political turbulences, internally and externally, especially foreigners' attacks. Sometimes the internal threats from the Mongols, Khurasan, Genghis Khan, Taimur, and the Safavids, Ottoman Turks, Uzbeks, and Afghans also made them to travel or migrate. The invasions and internal turmoils made them to migrate to west coast of India initially and later to the other parts of the country. These large number of Iranian immigrants were called Afakis or Garish. This happened during the Muhammadan bin Tughlaq, who transferred his kingdom to Daulatabad. And there the ulamas, they tried to stay back and again come back at a later period. During the Bahmani rule and after the Iranian migration to India naturally increased, this nurtured, helped grow and maintain strong relation between both countries. Many ulama poets, writers, architects, artisans, builders, calligraphers and tradesmen brought with them the rich cultural heritage, knowledge and science and culture to the Deccan. The fusion of both cultures gave birth to Deccan culture. Persian was the court language of the Bahmani kingdom. The Bahmani Sultan generally patronized the Iranian scholars. The Persian literature flourished. Several monumental works in Persian were produced. Apart from that, the Iranians richly contributed in the administrative field, laid down the policy of tolerance, brotherhood, and broad-mindedness as the very basis of their administration. They were appointed to the administrative post purely based on merit, irrespective of religion, sect, caste, or creed. Thus, the Iran-Deccan relation strengthened after the Bahmani kingdom was integrated into 5 dynasties. Further, a panoramic view of the Deccan with Iran is also examined briefly. We have historically unity in language and culture are the main characteristics of Andhra Pradesh and the Deccan. We permitted the life of the people through the centuries. In addition, the state fortunately also inherited from its predecessors a tradition of cosmopolitanism. After the fall of the Kakatiyas in 1323, the country came under the dominion of the Bahmani kingdom with its capital originally at Gulbarga and later at Bidar. The kingdom and its successors established in the Deccan a center of Islamic culture which had direct links with Iran and also Arab world. Here I would like to stress upon not only Islamic culture, even it was a political center, political culture, which has been maintained, sustained since the Qutubiyya times till now. Some writers claim that the language known as Deccani, which originated in the Deccan during this time, provided the basis for the Urdu language, which latter became a medium of communication among the educated people, especially in North India, under the Sultanate of Delhi and the Mughal Empire. The Bahmani kingdom was founded by Alauddin Zafar Khan about the middle of 14th century. He was known as Hassan Gangu Bahmani. The 5 sultanates formed after the breakup of Bahmani kingdom. These were known after the title of their founders: the Imam Shahi dynasty, the Nizam Shahi dynasty, the Adil Shahi dynasty, the Qutub Shahi dynasty of Golconda, and the Bariz Shahi dynasty of Bidar. These 5 dynasties ruled over the Deccan during the 16th and 18th century. The Deccan Plateau region in South India was ruled by the Vijayanagara rulers. On the other hand, the Mughals controlled over the Deccan. The first Nizam declared independent and founded the Asafjahi dynasty in 1724. His successors lost to the British much of the territory which was ruled by the first Nizam. The struggle between the French and the English resulted in the English emerging as the masters of the South. Thus, the Nizams continued to rule until the merger of Hyderabad state in 1948. In the 16th century, Quli Qutbul Malik migrated to Delhi from Iran with his uncle Ala Quli and some of his relatives and friends. Later, he moved to south to the Deccan and served the Bahmani Sultan. Muhammad Shah, after disintegration to 5 Deccan Sultanate, he conquered Golconda, declared independence from the Bahmani Sultanate. He took the title Qutub Shah and established the Qutub Shahi dynasty. The Deccan Sultanates ruled medieval kingdoms, Midapur, Golconda, Ahmadnagar, Bidar, and Virar in southwestern India. Their architecture was a regional variant of Indo-Islamic. It is heavily influenced by the styles of the Delhi Sultanate and later in Mughal architecture, but sometimes from Persia and Central Asia directly. These rulers had several cultural contributions to their credit in the fields of art, music, literature, and architecture. They have constructed many grand, impregnable forts, and Bidar fort is classical example of military planning of Deccan sultanates. Apart from forts, they have constructed many tombs, mosques, and madrasas. For example, Muhammad Gaban Madrasa is very significant. The tombs of Bahmani at Astur, Barishais, and Adil Barishais are to name with. The initial capital of Bahmani Sultans was Gulbarga. It was Gulbarga Fort, great mosque and the half Gumbad complex have to be taken into consideration. The most remarkable monuments in Bijapur are the Gol Gumbaz, the tomb of Muhammad Adil Shah, which was the second largest dome in the world, and Ibrahim Rose, tomb of Ibrahim Adil Shah, and other importance are Jame Masjid, architectural works of this period. The China Mahal, Jal Mandir, Sat Mandir, Gagan Mahal, Anand Mahal, and the Asar Mahal are considered to be important. The Golconda Fort is one of the most impregnable forts in India. It is also famous for its acoustic features and water management. The Jame Masjid, built by Kuli Qutub Mulk, is a notable mosque in it. The tomb of Qutub Shahis are a mausoleum complex, a royal necropolis of 13 tombs of the royal family. These are erected during the time from 1543 to 1672. The Charminar is the heart of Hyderabad. It was completed in 1591 and it has 4 minarets of 56 feet height. The construction of the Mukka Masjid was started in 1617 during the reign of Muhammad Qutub Shah but completed only in 1693. The Qutubshahi rulers were great builders as well as patrons of learning. Kuli Qutub Mulk court became a heaven for Persian culture and literature. Sultan Muhammad Kuli Qutub Shah wrote poems in Dakkani Urdu, Persian and Telugu and left a huge poetry collection. Subsequent poets and writers wrote in Urdu while using vocabulary from Persian and Hindi and Telugu language. By 1535, the Qutub Shahis were using Telugu for their revenues and judicial areas within the sultanates. Initially, the Qutub Shahi rulers patronized Persian culture, but eventually adopted the regional culture of the Deccan, symbolized by the Telugu language, and the newly developed Deccan idiom of Urdu became prominent. Although Telugu was not their mother tongue, the Golconda rulers spoke and wrote Telugu and patronized Telugu exclusively. They were termed as Telugu Sultans. In 1543, fearing for his title, Prince Ibrahim Kuli fled to the Vijayanagara court, which lavishly patronized the Telugu language. Upon his enthronement as Sultan in 1550, Ibrahim Kuli was thoroughly acquainted with Telugu aesthetics. During the reign of Muhammad Kuli Qutub Shah, relations between the Hindus and Muslims were strengthened, even to the point of Hindus resuming their religious festivals like Diwali and Holi. Some Hindus rose to prominence in Qutub Shahi state, the most important example being the ministers Madanna and Akkanna. The Qutub Shahi architecture was Indo-Islamic, a culmination of Indian and Persian architectural styles. Their style was very similar to that of other Deccan sultanates. Some examples of Qutub Shahi Indo-Islamic architecture are the Golconda Fort, tombs of the Qutub Shahis, Charminar and the Char Kamans, Makkah Masjid, Khairatabad Mosque, Hayat Bakshi Begum, Dharamati, Baramati and the Tori Mosque are significant. The dynasty ruled for 171 years until the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb conquered the Deccan in 1687. Thus, the Qutub Shahi dynasty has been considered as a composite of Hindu-Muslim religion, social culture. The medieval Bahmani sultans and successors of the Deccan Sultan of Central India had heavy Persian influence. The Bahmani sultans actively recruited Persian or Persianized men in their administration. Sultan Firoz would send ships from his ports in Goa and Chaulto to the Persian goal to bring back talented men of letters, administrators, jurists, soldiers, and artisans. The highborn Iranian Muhammad Gavan rose to become a powerful minister of the state during the reign of another Bahman Sultan. They are all ancestors from the Iranians, therefore they settled here in Bahmani. Richard Eaton writes that even the Hindu Vijayanagara Empire from the same period was highly Persianized in its culture. The royal quarters of the capital had many Persian architectural elements such as domes and vaulted arches. The Indian rulers used the talents of foreigners, including Iranians, as they were considered trustworthy, good administrators, and loyal to their duties always. The commercial relation between India and Iran commenced from the 3rd century millennium BC and reached their zenith in the middle of period, the time of Sargon of Akkad. Except for 1600 BC to 600 BC, due to the chaotic condition, there was no relation between the two regions for a long time. India is geographically located in the center of network of seas. They were commercial partners during the Parthian in 250 BC to 226 BC. They preferred sea route since land route was not safe. Silk, agriculture and manufactured products of India were exported, whereas Iranian silk was imported to India along with the almonds, badami, and Shiraz wine. Even to plan for the travel, they had certain parameters like length of traveling time, personal safety, and safety of the goods, money in possession, and transaction costs. From 13th century onwards, due to the Mongol invasions and destruction of Baghdad, Persian Gulf declined. Later on in the 16th century, the route gained prominence. Of course, the travel of Iranian Sufis to India was to propagate their mystical thoughts. Example, the travel of Khaja Moinuddin Siji, the founder of the Chishya order from Rajasthan to Ajmer, is an important care. Ajmer became a religious center where thousands of pilgrims assembled from far and near. Shiaism was an important religious link between the rulers and subjects of the two countries. Important of Najaf and Karbala are considered as the two Shiites' holy places. Indian Shiite rulers patronized and dedicated their financial support to the shrine of the Shia Imams. The Qutub Shahi kingdom was like the other Deccan kingdom, a highly centralized state. The Sultan enjoyed absolute executive, judicial and military powers. When expediency demanded, the post of regent was created to carry on the administration on behalf of the king. The Peshwa's prime minister was the highest official of the Sultanate. He was assisted by a number of ministers, including Mir Jumla, finance minister, Kotwal, police commissioner, and Kazanadar, treasurer. The court language during the Delhi Sultanate period was Persian or Arabic. However, Marathi was widely used during the period, especially by Adil Shahi of Bijapur and the Ahmednagar Sultanates. Although the rulers was Muslim, the local feudal lords and the revenue collectors were Hindus, and so was majority of the population. Political expediency made it important for the Sultan to make use of Marathi. Nevertheless, Marathi, in official document from the era, is totally Persianized in its vocabulary. The Persian influence continues to this day with many Persian derived words used in everyday speech, such as we call Bagh is garden, Karkhana factory, Shahar city, Bazar market, Dukan shop, Hoshyar clever, Kagaz paper, Kurchi chair, Zameen land, Zahirat advertisement, and Hazar 1,000. These are all the Persian things. Still it is in the use day to day. Yeah. The Bahmani Sultan is disintegrated into 5 Deccan Sultanates, as I already said. They are similar in culture, Hyderabad. built by the Golconda Sultanates in 16th century, was inspired from Isfahan. The use of Persian as a court language in Hyderabad continued under the Nizam of Hyderabad and only replaced by Urdu in 1886. With the transfer of the Muslim population to Deogari in 1329, the Persian culture that flourished in the Delhi Sultanate was transplanted to the Deccan. The leading court poet Amir Nijamul Hasan Dahlvi was one of those forced to move Tughlaq officials in Deogari and elsewhere sponsored works in Persian on such subjects as lexicography and Islamic law, and at nearby Rawda, the Sufi circle around the Chasti Sheikh Burhanuddin Karib produced an extensive mystical literature including recorded oral teachings, hagiographies and speculative treatises. Legends about Sufis in the Deccan before Khalji conquests are late hagiographical by contemporary documents. After the brief period of Tughlaq's rule, the Deccan Sultans contributed to a remarkable flourishing of Persian literature. Persian culture always existed in tension with local Indic cultural traditions. However, as it was totally dependent upon the court patronage and elite Sufi circles, the different types of Persian literature produced in the Deccan may be categorized in the following categorized as follows. There are 2-3 categories: court poetry and belief letters. I'll quote few of them. The Sultans of the Deccan were great patrons of Persian poetry, and some were known as poets themselves. Many poets came from Persia and Central Asia to India seeking their fortunes. That indicates that more than 700 in Safavid period time they came. A large portion of them came to the Deccan courts. Among them, Muhammad Qasim Farishta, his successor Ahmad Shah Wali made Gulbarga a center of Persian culture. After the establishment of minor Deccan Sultanate, Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah and his descendants eagerly welcomed talented Persian poet El Golconda. A Bijapur Ibrahim Adil Shah employed Zohri Torziki, who wrote his Sehnatar as an introduction in rhyming prose to his patron's Dakkani Urdu treatise on poetry and music. Kitabe Novaras. Many critics regard Zohri Tarzi as chief exponent of the luxuriant Indian style, was impressed with his extremely florid style. The Persian poetry introduced in Deccan stylistic did not differ notably from that which was produced in northern India or Persia. Many poets circulated among all these areas. For example, Muhammad Amin, who produced poetry at Golconda and admired epic quintet in initiation of Nizami's works, went on to Bijapur and then back to Persia before finally obtaining a satisfactory position from the Mughals. In the late 18th century, while Delhi court taste was turning toward Urdu poetry, Persian anthologies continued to appear in the Deccan. The prolific Ghulam Ali Azad Belgrami composed 3 Vaiza, Sade Azad and Khazana-e Amera. Although in the 19th century, Persian literary activity waned in favor of the Urdu, but Hyderabad continued as a center of Persian studies. The former court libraries there, the Asafi, the present Telangana government Oriental Manuscript Library and Research, the Salajang Museum, and they are still the finest Persian collection in the region. There are a number of historical works, what we call historiography, in the Deccan were modeled on the epics and chronicles of Ghaznavids and Ghurids, which had formed the basis for the court culture of the Delhi Sultanate. The first great historical work produced in the Deccan was Abeda Malik, which celebrated the triumph of the Bahmanis over the Tughlaq in epic Matnavis modeled on those of Federals of Sohnama. Adari Tusi wrote Bahmana Nama for Ahmad Wali, modeling it on the prose history of Tohbat Salatin by Mullah Dawood Bidri. The most famous Deccan history, however, is Ferista's Gulshan-e Ibrahimi, written for Ibrahimi Adil Shahi between 1606 to 67 and 1623 to 24 respectively. It is a general history of Indian dynasties focused on Bijapur with an important appendix on Sufi sheikhs. The work attracted the attention of the British in the late 18th century and most it was translated into English. The Bijapur chronicles the transition from the Mughals to the Asafjahi Nizams in the Deccan can best be measured from the voluminous biographical dictionary Ma Atare al Omar compiled by Sasmaf of Daula Shahnaz Khan. He is the Wazir to the first Nizam and completed by Azad Belgrami. Almost every important political figure of the 17th and 18th centuries is included. Sufi literature at Golconda, the Qutub Shahis, who continued to favor Shiaism, concentrated their patronage on Dakkani Urdu and Telugu poetry in honor of Imam and on scholarship and poetry in Arabic. As the Mughals expanded into the Deccan, so did Sufi orders that were well established in their domain. As many important Persian Sufi writings from the Deccan remain in manuscripts or have not survived, biographical works that include excerpts from them are extremely valuable. Among the most important is the Pan-Indian Hagiography. Most of these collections were either produced under royal patronage or include tradition of political origin, so that their accounts must often be measured against the tradition in manifest texts and other Sufi writings. As use of the Persian language declined during the 19th century, the history of Sufism in Hyderabad and the rest of the Deccan must be supplemented with works written in Dakkani Urdu and other local languages for the benefit of devotees. And to conclude, because I'm switching over to the conclusion part, leaving certain portion of the other things like other literature and the rewards to the poets, would like to name the ruler of Ahmad Shah. He bestowed favors onto the two poets. One is the Sheikh Azari of Ifraini in Quraisim, who has been given a lot of funds, huge amount. And then the Maulana Sharafuddin Mazamdari, another poet, was also rewarded with 12,000 tankas for inscribing in beautiful handwriting of 2 verses on the door of that palace. And of course, there are a number of foreign travelers who visited. I would like to take the names and switch over to the conclusion part. You have, apart from ancient to modern industry, Indian subcontinent encountered many foreign travelers, and some of them left valuable accounts of their travel. These foreign accounts gave us valuable objective document that will help us to understand the social, political, economic condition of the particular era. These travelers' account cannot be understood with knowing their perception of writing. Here we are giving the list of famous travelers who visited India during the reign of different rulers of Deccan and Vijayanagara. I will just touch the names and then one is Ambrose Taylor and Robert Sewell. Another is Althani Sa Nikitan. Then Abu Abdullah Ibn Battuta, Nicola de Conti, Abdul Razak, Ludovico Vartema, Barbosa, Domingo Peace, Fernando Nunes, Marco Polo, and the victors, Farishta, Edward Barboso, and many others. They tried to contribute writing down the entire proceedings, whatever they have seen during the time of that particular thing. As a historian, you all know what is the important significance of every chronicler or every person, the poet writes about. Sometimes it will be a positive, sometimes it will be a negative, but mostly the poets who were there in the court, they used to write positive outlook of the rulers. But however, as a historian, we have to take the notes and try to judge, looking at the both the merits and demerits, and write about the important contribution of these people. So thereby, I would like to close upon that many sources on Indo-Islamic and architecture paintings, treatise, diplomatic relations, commercial dealings, religious interaction, manuscript collections and archive materials, Persian texts, foreigners' writings and other relevant materials are to examine further, to throw some light, to have glimpses of an outlook on the theme of the conference comprehensively. And this morning, we were just interacting with Dr. Mir Asghar Hussain Sahab with regards to why we are invited here. What made all of us to be with all of you? It is the will of Allah, it is the will of God that made of all of us to be here on the platform, to be in the midst of all of you is another great opportunity what we have. And therefore, one of a great author, Muzaffar Alam, writes that the transition of knowledge and scholarly skills continues this way from generation to generation, not only in the university, but also away from it everywhere. Thank you very much.
our Chief Guest Sri Burra Venkatesham, IAS Secretary, Tourism, Culture and Youth Affairs, Government of Telangana. I thank our General Guest of Honor, Dr. Mir Asghar Hussain, Director Retired, UNESCO, Professor A. Sudhakar, Director Academic, for his benevolence in being a part of this conference. Thank you, sir.